The transport ship shook violently as it tore through the thick atmosphere of Kepler 442c. Inside the passenger bay, 6 military cadets from different worlds gripped their safety harnesses as warning lights flashed red throughout the cabin. The automated voice system repeated the same message over and over in multiple languages. Emergency landing protocol activated. All passengers prepare for impact. Cadet Hyunwoo Park pressed his face against the small window and watched the green forest canopy rushing up to meet them. The trees looked massive from this height, their alien branches spreading wide like giant umbrellas. He had seen forest before on his home colony world, but nothing quite like this. The vegetation here seemed darker, more twisted, and definitely more dangerous. Beside him, Cadet Tabin made a sound of disgust. The crystalline being's body reflected the red emergency lights like a living prism, casting rainbow patterns on the metal walls. His voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. "This is exactly why I told the Academy that primitive worlds should not be used for training exercises," Tabin said. "My people evolved past the need for such barbaric environments thousands of years ago." Across the aisle, Cadet So Young struggled to breathe through her gills. The dry, recycled air inside the ship was already causing her discomfort. Her blue-scaled skin looked pale, and she kept touching the moisture packs attached to her neck. She came from an ocean world where the air was always thick with water vapor. "At least you can breathe properly," she gasped. "This dry air environment is torture for my species." Cadet Minho flickered slightly, his energy-based form becoming less solid as stress affected his molecular cohesion. Unlike the others, he did not have a physical body in the traditional sense. Instead, he existed as organized energy patterns held together by advanced technology built into his uniform. "The electromagnetic interference from this planet's atmosphere is affecting my stability," Minho said, his voice crackling like static. "I may need to consume additional energy reserves if this continues." The insectoid Cadet Yun clicked her mandibles together in what Hyunwoo had learned was her species' equivalent of sighing. Her compound eyes reflected the emergency lights in thousands of tiny points, making her look like she was covered in glittering jewels. As the unofficial leader of their study group, she always tried to maintain order during stressful situations. "Everyone remained calm," Daun said in her precise, clipped accent. "The probability of surviving a controlled crash landing in a forest environment is approximately 73%. Assuming standard emergency protocols are followed correctly." The sixth cadet, Woo Jin, said nothing. His plant-like body was already turning a sickly yellow color as the ship's artificial environment systems began to fail. His species normally absorbed nutrients directly from soil through root-like appendages, but the metal floor of the transport ship provided nothing he could use for sustenance. Hyunwoo listened to his classmates' complaints and felt a strange calm settle over him. While they worried about the technology failing in the primitive environment below, he found himself actually looking forward to the challenge. Growing up on a farming colony had taught him that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The impact came suddenly and violently. The transport ship hit the first line of trees with a tremendous crash that threw all 6 cadets forward against their restraints. Metal groaned and twisted as the vessel carved a path through the forest, snapping tree trunks like twigs and gouging a deep furrow in the rich soil. When the ship finally came to rest, everything was quiet except for the hissing of steam from ruptured cooling lines. One by one, the cadets unbuckled their safety harnesses and began to assess their situation. Hyunwoo was the first to stand up. His human body was built for exactly this kind of punishment, with sturdy bones and flexible joints that could absorb impact. The other cadets moved more slowly, their specialized physiologies not designed for sudden violent motion. "Emergency supplies check," Daun ordered, immediately taking charge of the situation. "Everyone locate your survival kit and report its condition." The cadets spread out through the damaged passenger compartment, searching through scattered equipment and debris. What they found was not encouraging. The emergency rations storage had been crushed during the crash, leaving nothing but twisted metal and spilled synthetic nutrients that were already evaporating in the alien air. "My food supplies are completely destroyed," Tabin reported, his crystalline body dimming with worry. "Without processed nutrients, I can only survive for perhaps 4 days using photosynthesis alone." So Young held up her breathing apparatus, which had cracked down one side. "My humidity generator is damaged. I will need to find a water source within 24 hours or risk respiratory failure." Minho's form flickered more rapidly as his stress increased. The energy storage cells are all cracked. I can maintain cohesion for maybe 3 days before I begin to lose molecular stability. Wu Jin finally spoke, his voice like rustling leaves. I require specific mineral compounds that do not exist in this alien soil composition. Without supplements, I will enter dormancy within 48 hours. Dayun processed all this information with typical insectoid efficiency. Conclusion. Our survival window is between 24 and 96 hours depending on individual species requirements. Emergency beacon is functional and transmitting our location. Rescue probability is high, assuming orbital command received our distress signal. While his classmates focused on their damaged equipment and calculated survival probabilities, Hyunwoo moved to the shattered window and looked out at the forest surrounding them. What the others saw as a hostile alien environment, he saw as an opportunity. The trees here were indeed different from those on his home world, but they still followed familiar patterns. He could see animal tracks in the mud around a small stream that ran past their crash site. There were broken branches where large creatures had passed through recently, and scattered droppings that indicated a healthy ecosystem with multiple food sources. "Hey everyone," Hyunwoo called out. "There's fresh water about 50 meters from here, and I can see signs of animal life all around us." Taebin turned toward him with obvious annoyance. "Animal life is irrelevant to our survival, human. We need processed nutrients and technology, not primitive biological matter." "But what if rescue takes longer than expected?" Hyunwoo asked. "What if the storm that brought us down is still interfering with communications?" "Then we wait," Dawen said firmly. "Civilized species do not resort to barbaric hunting practices. We have emergency protocols for exactly these situations." So Young nodded agreement despite her obvious discomfort. "My people abandoned such primitive behaviors millennia ago when we developed sustainable aquaculture systems." Hyunwoo looked at his classmates and realized that none of them understood what he was trying to tell them. They had all evolved past the need to hunt and forage for survival. Their civilizations had developed technology that provided everything they needed, and they viewed the natural world as something to be controlled rather than lived within. But Hyunwoo remembered the lessons his grandfather had taught him about reading the land and understanding the rhythms of nature. Even on an alien world, those lessons still applied. The forest around them was not a hostile environment to be feared. It was a source of everything they needed to survive. As night began to fall on their first day stranded in the alien forest, Hyunwoo quietly began to plan. His classmates might not understand the value of primitive skills yet, but he had a feeling they would learn very quickly. The second day on Kepler 442c began with the sound of Dawen's precise voice cutting through the morning air, like a knife. The insectoid cadet had been awake since before dawn, methodically checking their equipment and calculating their deteriorating situation. "Water reserves are at 60% capacity," she announced to the group. "Based on current consumption rates and individual species requirements, we have approximately 48 hours before rationing becomes critical." Hyunwoo sat up from where he had been sleeping against a fallen tree trunk. Unlike his alien classmates, he had actually slept well despite the hard ground and strange sounds of the forest at night. His human body was designed to adapt to uncomfortable conditions, something his grandfather had always said was one of humanity's greatest strengths. The other cadets looked much worse than they had the day before. Taebin's crystalline body had lost most of its brilliant shine, appearing dull and cloudy like old glass. He sat in the one patch of sunlight that managed to filter through the thick forest canopy. But even with direct solar exposure, his photosynthetic processes were clearly struggling. "The light spectrum here is all wrong," Taebin complained, his voice lacking its usual wind chime clarity. "My people evolved under the triple suns of Velthar Prime. This single yellow star provides insufficient energy for proper cellular function." So Young was in even worse condition. Her blue scales had turned a sickly gray color, and she wheezed with each breath. The moisture packs on her neck were nearly empty, and the humid air her species required was nowhere to be found in this dry forest environment. "I tried to absorb water vapor from the morning mist," she gasped, "but the atmospheric composition is too different. My gills are becoming irritated and my breathing is getting more difficult." Minho flickered like a dying light bulb. His energy-based form kept losing cohesion around the edges, making him appear fuzzy and unstable. Without the processed energy compounds his species normally consumed, He was literally starting to fade away. Molecular stability decreasing, Minho reported in his static-filled voice. Energy reserves at 30% and falling. I estimate complete dissipation in approximately 72 hours without proper fuel sources. Wu Jin had turned completely yellow overnight, his plant-like skin taking on the color of dying leaves. He sat with his root appendages buried in the alien soil, trying desperately to absorb some kind of nutrition from the foreign earth. The mineral composition is all wrong, Wu Jin whispered in his rustling voice. I can sense copper and iron compounds, but nothing my biology can process safely. I tried to absorb basic nutrients, but the soil chemistry made me violently ill. Dayun processed all this information with her typical mathematical precision, but even her compound eyes seemed dimmer than usual. The stress of leadership combined with her own growing hunger was taking its toll on the insectoid cadet. Situation assessment: we are experiencing rapid deterioration across all biological systems, she announced. Rescue probability remains high, but our survival window is narrowing faster than initially calculated. While his classmates shared their increasingly desperate reports, Hyunwoo walked to the edge of their makeshift camp. The stream he had noticed the day before was running clear and fast, with small fish-like creatures darting through the shallows. Fresh animal tracks crisscrossed the muddy banks, and he could see where large herbivores had come to drink during the night. The forest was full of life, but his alien classmates seemed completely blind to it. They saw only hostile wilderness where Hyunwoo saw abundant food sources and survival opportunities. I could try to catch some of those fish, Hyunwoo suggested, pointing toward the stream, and there are definitely large animals in this area. Look at all these tracks. Tabin made a sound of disgust that came out like breaking glass. The idea of consuming raw biological matter is revolting. My people have not engaged in such primitive behavior for over 10,000 years. Even if you could catch something, how would we prepare it? So Young asked between labored breaths. We have no cooking facilities, no processing equipment. Raw alien flesh could contain toxins or parasites. Da-Yun clicked her mandibles disapprovingly. Hunting and foraging are inefficient survival strategies. Our emergency protocols clearly state that maintaining position and awaiting rescue is the optimal approach. But what if rescue is delayed? Hyunwoo pressed. What if the storm that brought us down is still interfering with communications? Then we follow rationing procedures and maintain discipline, Da-Un replied firmly. Panic and desperation lead to poor decision-making. Hyunwoo looked at his dying classmates and felt frustration building in his chest. They were surrounded by everything they needed to survive, but their advanced civilizations had made them helpless in a natural environment. They would rather starve than adapt to their circumstances. Despite their protest, Hyunwoo decided to explore on his own. He told the group he was going to scout for a better campsite, but really he wanted to examine the forest more carefully. If his classmates were going to survive, someone needed to understand what resources were available. The forest felt alive around him as he moved quietly through the underbrush. His grandfather had taught him how to walk without making noise, how to read the signs that animals left behind, and how to distinguish between safe and dangerous plants. These skills, which his classmates viewed as primitive and barbaric, felt as natural to Hyunwoo as breathing. He found several promising locations near the stream where animal trails converged. The soil was soft here, marked with the footprints of creatures that came regularly to drink. Some of the tracks were quite large, suggesting animals that could provide substantial amounts of meat if successfully hunted. The plant life was more challenging to assess. Everything was alien here, with strange leaves and unfamiliar fruits. His grandfather's lessons had taught him to be extremely careful with unknown vegetation, but Hyunwoo could see patterns that suggested some plants might be edible if properly prepared. When he returned to camp an hour later, he found his classmates in even worse condition. Minho was barely visible now, his energy form so unstable that he looked like heat shimmer on a hot day. Wu Jin had pulled his root appendages out of the soil and was curled up in obvious pain. The emergency beacon is still transmitting, Da-Yun reported when she saw Hyunwoo return. But we have received no response from orbital command. Communication interference may be more severe than initially calculated. How long can we really last like this? Hyunwoo asked quietly. Da-Yun's compound eyes focused on him with mathematical coldness. Based on current deterioration rates, species-specific survival windows range from 18 hours for Minho to perhaps 4 days for you. Your human physiology appears most suited to this environment. The implication was clear. Hyunwoo would likely be the only survivor if rescue did not arrive soon. His alien classmates, for all their technological advancement and sophisticated civilizations, were helpless when stripped of their artificial life support systems. That evening, as his classmates huddled together sharing their last emergency rations, Hyunwoo sat apart and watched the forest come alive with night sounds. Somewhere in the darkness, predators hunted prey while herbivores sought shelter. It was the same eternal dance of survival that had shaped life on countless worlds, including his own. His classmates might view hunting and foraging as primitive barbarism, but Hyunwoo knew these skills represented millions of years of evolutionary wisdom. While other species had abandoned their natural abilities in favor of technology, humans had retained the flexible adaptability that allowed them to survive anywhere. Tomorrow, whether his classmates approved or not, Hyunwoo would begin the hunt. Their lives depended on skills they did not understand and abilities they had dismissed as worthless. But human stubborn determination had kept his species alive through ice ages and asteroid impacts, and it would keep them alive on this alien world too. The third day dawned gray and misty, with thick fog rolling through the forest like ghostly fingers. Hyunwoo woke to find Minho barely visible at all, his energy form so weak that he looked like a faint outline against the morning sky. The energy-based cadet was dying, and everyone knew it. Woo Jin had not moved since the previous evening. His plant-like body lay curled in a tight ball, all his leaves turned brown and brittle. When Hyunwoo touched his shoulder gently, Woo Jin's eyes opened just enough to show he was still alive, but barely. So Young sat propped against a tree, her breathing shallow and labored. Her blue scales had turned almost completely gray, and the moisture packs on her neck were bone dry. She had not spoken since yesterday afternoon, saving what little energy she had left. Even Taebin, who had seemed the strongest after Hyunwoo himself, was now dim and cloudy. His crystalline body looked like frosted glass, and when he tried to speak, his voice came out as barely a whisper. Only Da-eun remained alert, her compound eyes still sharp as she calculated and recalculated their chances of survival. But even she was weaker now, her movements slower and less precise than before. "Status report," she said quietly. "Minho has perhaps 6 hours of coherent existence remaining. Woo Jin is entering final dormancy phase. So Young is experiencing severe respiratory distress. I estimate our collective survival window at less than 12 hours. Hyunwoo looked at his dying classmates and made a decision that would have horrified their instructors back at the academy. While they had been trained to wait for technological rescue, he had been raised to take action when lives were at stake. "I am going hunting," he announced simply. The reaction was immediate, even from his weakened classmates. Taebin managed to lift his dim head in protest. "You cannot seriously be considering such barbaric behavior." "It is against all academy protocols," Da-eun said, though her voice lacked its usual authority. "Hunting primitive life forms is banned by 17 different interspecies treaties. Those treaties do not apply to survival situations," Hyunwoo replied calmly. "And they definitely do not apply when my friends are dying." He stood up and began gathering materials from the wreckage of their transport ship. A long piece of metal tubing became the shaft of a spear. Some strong cable from the ship's systems provided cord for binding and for making a sling. He tore strips of fabric from his own uniform to create the pouch for the sling. His classmates watched in fascination and horror as Hyunwoo transformed pieces of their crashed vessel into primitive weapons. To them, it seemed like watching civilization itself being dismantled and rebuilt into something crude and violent. "How do you know how to make such things?" So Young whispered, her voice barely audible. "My grandfather taught me," Hyunwoo replied as he tested the balance of his improvised spear. He said that humans who forgot how to hunt and forage would not survive when the technology failed them. He found several smooth stones near the stream and tested his sling, sending rocks flying with surprising accuracy. His classmates flinched at each sharp crack as stone met tree trunk, unused to such displays of primitive violence. "The Academy teaches that advanced species have evolved beyond the need for such brutality," Taebin said weakly. "Maybe," Hyunwoo replied. "But right now, this brutality is the only thing that can keep you alive." With his weapons ready, Hyunwoo began to track the animal signs he had noticed over the past 2 days. The fog actually helped, muffling his movements and making him harder for prey animals to detect. His grandfather had taught him that successful hunting required patience above all else. Following the clearest set of tracks, Yunwu made his way deeper into the forest. The prints belonged to something about the size of a large deer, with 6 legs instead of 4. The spacing of the steps told him it was a grazing animal, probably not dangerous unless cornered. The trail led to a natural clearing where several animals had been feeding on a type of purple grass that grew in the open sunlight. Hyunwoo crouched behind a fallen log and waited, his spear ready and his sling loaded with a smooth stone. Time passed slowly. His alien classmates, with their advanced technology and instant gratification, would never have had the patience for this kind of hunting. They expected immediate results from their tools and weapons. But hunting was different. Hunting required becoming part of the natural rhythm of the forest. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Yunwoo heard the soft sound of hooves on forest floor. 3 creatures emerged from the opposite side of the clearing, moving cautiously toward the purple grass. They were beautiful in their alien way, with long necks and large eyes that constantly scanned for danger. Their 6 legs gave them a graceful gait unlike anything on Earth. But they moved with the same careful alertness that Hyunwoo recognized from deer back home. He chose the smallest of the 3, knowing that he would need to carry his kill back to camp. Taking careful aim with his sling, Hyunwoo sent a stone flying with deadly accuracy. The creature dropped instantly, killed by a clean blow to the head. The other 2 animals fled immediately, crashing through the underbrush in their panic to escape. Hyunwoo felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and regret that came with a successful hunt. Taking a life was never something to celebrate, but providing food for his dying friends was a responsibility he could not ignore. The creature was heavier than he had expected, but Hyunwoo managed to drag it back toward camp, using techniques his grandfather had taught him for moving large game. By the time he reached their crash site, his classmates were staring at him with expressions of shock and amazement. "You actually killed something," Taebin whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and desperate hope. "Now what?" Taeyun asked. "How do we process raw biological matter without proper equipment?" Hyunwoo smiled grimly and began gathering dry wood and tinder. "The same way humans have been doing it for thousands of years. We make fire." His classmates watched in stunned silence as Hyunwoo used friction to create sparks, then carefully nurtured those sparks into flame. To them, fire was something that came from technological ignition systems. The idea that it could be created using nothing but wood and patience seemed like magic. Soon a steady fire was crackling in their makeshift camp, sending smoke curling up through the forest canopy. The warmth felt wonderful after 2 cold nights, but more importantly, the fire would allow Hyunwoo to cook the meat safely. Fire without technology, So Young breathed, her eyes wide with amazement. "I did not know such a thing was possible." "There is a lot your species never learned because you never needed to," Hyunwoo replied as he began to carefully skin and clean his kill. "But humans never stopped learning these things, because we knew that someday we might need them again." As the smell of cooking meat filled the air, Hyunwoo saw something he had not seen in his classmates' eyes for days: hope. They were beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, these primitive human skills were not barbaric relics of an uncivilized past. Maybe they were the key to survival itself. The smell of cooking meat filled the forest clearing as Hyunwoo carefully tended the fire. His alien classmates watched him with a mixture of fascination and desperate hunger as he prepared their first real meal in 3 days. But feeding 5 different species would require more than just roasted meat. "Each of you has different dietary needs," Hyunwoo said as he studied his weakened friends. "I need to understand exactly what your bodies can process before I give you anything to eat." So Young was the easiest to help. Her aquatic species were natural carnivores, designed to consume raw fish and marine proteins. Hyunwoo carefully cut away the cleanest pieces of meat and offered them to her uncooked, just as she would have eaten them in her ocean home. "I cannot eat land animal flesh," So Young protested weakly. "My digestive system is adapted for marine biology only." "Protein is protein," Hyunwoo replied gently. "Your body needs nutrition more than it needs familiar food. Trust me." So Young hesitated for a long moment, then took a small piece of the raw meat. Her sharp teeth, designed for tearing fish, handled the alien flesh easily. Within minutes, color began to return to her gray scales and her breathing became noticeably easier. It tastes strange, she admitted, but I can feel my strength returning already. Tabin presented a more complex challenge. His crystalline physiology could only process nutrients in very specific forms, and his digestive system was extremely delicate. Yunwu spent over an hour cooking small pieces of meat until they were tender enough for Tabin to consume safely. My people have not eaten biological matter in millennia, Tabin said as Yunwu offered him the carefully prepared food. Our bodies may reject it entirely. Then we start with tiny amounts and see how you respond, Yunwu replied. Better to try something than to die of starvation. Tabin accepted a piece of meat no larger than a pebble. His crystalline body processed it slowly, and within an hour his dim surface began to show the first hints of returning brightness. It was not much, but it was progress. Minho required a completely different approach. His energy-based form could not consume solid matter at all. Instead, Hyunwoo had to find a way to convert biological nutrients into a form that Minho's unusual physiology could absorb. Using techniques his grandfather had taught him for making survival broths, Hyunwoo boiled meat and bones for hours until he had created a nutrient-rich liquid. Then he had an inspiration. Minho's uniform contained technology that converted various substances into the energy compounds his species needed. Can your suit process organic liquids? Hyunwoo asked. Minho flickered with what might have been hope. Theoretically, yes, but the conversion efficiency would be very low. Low efficiency is better than no efficiency, Hyunwoo replied. They carefully fed the hot broth into Minho's processing unit. The technology struggled with the unfamiliar organic compounds, but slowly began to produce the energy patterns that Minho needed to survive. His flickering form began to stabilize for the first time in days. Wu Jin presented the greatest challenge of all. His plant-like biology required specific minerals and trace elements that were completely absent from meat. But Hyunwoo had been watching the local vegetation carefully, and he had noticed several plants that seemed similar to mineral-rich species from his homeworld. I am going to make you a tea from local plants, Hyunwoo told the barely conscious Wu Jin. It might be exactly what you need or it might poison you, but you are dying anyway, so we have to try. Hyunwoo gathered several different types of leaves and roots from around their campsite. He boiled them carefully, testing small amounts himself first to check for obvious toxins. His human physiology could handle a wider range of plant chemicals than most species, making him a relatively safe test subject. The resulting brew was bitter and strange smelling, but it contained high concentrations of the minerals that Wu Jin's species needed. They fed it to him drop by drop, watching carefully for any adverse reactions. Within hours, Wu Jin's brown leaves began to show tiny hints of green again. His root appendages, which had been withered and dry, started to plump up with returning moisture. It was a slow process, but it was working. Da-Yun was the most skeptical of Hyunwoo's primitive cooking methods. Her insectoid species had evolved highly efficient digestive systems, but they were also extremely sensitive to contamination and disease. The probability of bacterial infection from improperly prepared meat is extremely high, she said, even as her compound eyes followed every movement of Hyunwoo's hands. My species has not consumed unprocessed biological matter for thousands of years. Then we cook your portion longer and hotter than anyone else's, Hyunwoo replied. High temperature will kill any bacteria that might harm you. He prepared Da-Yun's food with extra care, cooking it until it was almost charcoal to ensure complete sterilization. The result was tough and flavorless, but it was safe and nutritious. Da-Yun's mathematical mind could not argue with the logic of survival. As the day progressed, Hyunwoo watched his classmates slowly return to life. The change was remarkable. So Young's scales regained their brilliant blue color, and her gills began processing the forest air more efficiently. Tabin's crystalline body started to shine again, reflecting the firelight in beautiful patterns. Minho's energy form stabilized enough that he could maintain full coherence for hours at a time. Wu Jin uncurled from his protective ball and began moving around the camp, his leaves turning greener by the hour. Even Da-Eun, despite her initial skepticism, had to admit that the primitive cooking methods were effectively meeting their nutritional needs. I must revise my earlier calculations, she said, as she consumed her second portion of thoroughly cooked meat. The probability of survival using these methods is significantly higher than I initially estimated. But more than just physical recovery, Hyun-woo noticed a change in his classmates' attitudes. They no longer looked at his hunting and cooking activities with disgust or horror. Instead, they watched with curiosity and growing respect. "How did you know which plants would be safe for Woo-jin?" Taebin asked as they sat around the fire that evening. "My grandfather taught me to recognize patterns," Hyun-woo replied. "Plants that serve similar functions often have similar characteristics even on different worlds." It was an educated guess, but it worked. "And the fire-making technique?" So Young asked. "That seemed impossible without ignition technology. Humans have been making fire for hundreds of thousands of years," Hyun-woo explained. "We learned to do it long before we developed any advanced technology. It is one of our most basic survival skills." Da-yoon clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "Your species retained these primitive capabilities even after developing space travel and advanced technology." "We never forgot where we came from," Hyun-woo said. "My people believe that the old skills are just as important as the new ones. You never know when you might need them." As they prepared to sleep on their third night in the forest, Hyun-woo's classmates were no longer the same beings who had crashed with him. They had learned that survival was not just about technology and processed resources. Sometimes it required older, deeper knowledge that came from understanding the natural world itself. And they were beginning to understand that humans, whom they had always considered primitive and backwards, might actually possess the most advanced survival technology in the galaxy. The fourth day brought unexpected news that changed everything. Da-yoon had been monitoring their emergency radio throughout the night, and just after dawn, she intercepted a series of distress signals that made her compound eyes widen with alarm. "Multiple emergency beacons detected," she announced to the group as they gathered around their morning fire. "At least 12 different crash sites scattered across this continent. The solar storm that brought us down affected the entire training fleet." Hyun-woo felt his stomach drop. "How many cadets are stranded out there?" "Preliminary estimates suggest over 60 individuals from 14 different species," Da-yoon replied, her voice tight with worry. "Many of the signals are already growing weak, indicating power failure or worse." The implications hit everyone immediately. While Hyun-woo's group had found a way to survive using primitive hunting and foraging techniques, dozens of other cadets were still facing the same deadly situation they had overcome. But those other groups did not have a human with traditional survival skills. Taebin's crystalline body dimmed with concern. "Without processed nutrients, most of those species will not survive more than a few days. Some may already be dead." So Young's newly restored blue scales rippled with distress. "The aquatic cadets will be in especially bad condition. If they crashed in dry areas away from water sources, they may have only hours left." Minho flickered anxiously. "Energy-based species like myself would be completely helpless without someone to help them find alternative food sources." Woo-jin rustled his now green leaves sadly. "Plant species require very specific soil conditions. Most will enter dormancy within days if they cannot find suitable growing environments." Hyun-woo stared into the fire as he processed this information. His classmates were right. While he had managed to save 5 alien cadets using human survival skills, 60 more were dying across the forest because they lacked those same primitive abilities. The rescue situation had also become more complicated. Da-yoon's radio monitoring revealed that the solar storm was still interfering with orbital communications. The rescue fleet was having trouble locating all the crash sites, and some areas were completely cut off from contact. "Estimated rescue time has been extended to between 7 and 14 days, Da-yoon reported grimly. "Most of the stranded cadets will not survive that long without assistance." Hyun-woo stood up abruptly and began pacing around their camp. His friends watched him with growing understanding as they realized what he was thinking. "You want to help them?" So-young said quietly. "You want to try to save cadets you have never even met?" 60 people are dying out there," Hyun-woo replied. "They are dying because they do not know how to hunt or forage or make fire. They are dying because their advanced civilizations never taught them the skills they need to survive in a natural environment." Taebin's voice took on a note of disbelief. "You cannot seriously be considering hunting enough food for 60 individuals from 14 different species. The logistics alone would be impossible, would it?" Hyun-woo asked. "You all survived because I learned to understand your different dietary needs. The principles would be the same for other species, just scaled up." Da-yoon ran rapid calculations in her head. The amount of biological matter required would be enormous. You would need to kill dozens of large animals and process hundreds of different plants. One individual could not possibly accomplish such a task. Not one individual, Hyunwoo replied with growing excitement. One individual teaching others. You have all learned basic hunting and foraging skills over the past few days. You could teach other survivors the same techniques. His classmates looked at each other with sudden understanding. Over the past 3 days, they had indeed learned primitive survival skills that would have seemed impossible to them a week ago. Tabin could now identify edible plants for crystalline physiology. So Young understood how to prepare meat for aquatic digestive systems. Minho had learned to use his technology to process organic broths into energy compounds. Woo Jin could recognize mineral-rich vegetation that would sustain plant-based species. Dae-yoon had become expert at calculating nutritional requirements and cooking times for different biological needs. You are suggesting we become primitive hunters and gatherers ourselves, Taeyoon said slowly. I am suggesting we become teachers, Hyunwoo corrected. Each of you could train survivors from your own species or similar physiologies. Instead of one human trying to feed 60 aliens, we could have teams of trained survivors working together. The idea was ambitious beyond anything they had attempted before. It would require locating multiple crash sites across hostile terrain, teaching desperate aliens to use techniques their species had abandoned millennia ago, and coordinating large-scale hunting operations that could feed dozens of individuals. But as Hyunwoo outlined his plan, his classmates began to see the possibilities. Their own transformation from helpless victims to capable survivors proved that the techniques could be learned quickly when lives were at stake. The air crash sites are scattered over hundreds of square kilometers, So Young pointed out. How would we even reach them all? We start with the closest ones and work outward, Hyunwoo replied. Each group we save becomes another center of survival knowledge that can help others. The energy requirements would be enormous, Minho added. Hunting enough game to feed large groups would require weapons and techniques far more advanced than anything we have used so far. Hyunwoo smiled grimly. Then it is time for me to teach you the really advanced human survival techniques. The ones my grandfather said were only for desperate situations. He began describing hunting methods that made his previous efforts seem simple by comparison. Coordinated group hunts that could bring down large prey animals, trap systems that could catch multiple creatures simultaneously, food preservation techniques that could store meat for weeks without spoiling. His classmates listened with growing amazement as Hyunwoo revealed the depth of human survival knowledge. What they had seen so far was just the beginning. Humans had spent millions of years developing techniques for surviving in every possible environment, and that knowledge was still passed down through families like his own. These techniques require teamwork and coordination, Hyunwoo explained, but they can produce enough food to sustain large groups for extended periods. The key is teaching everyone to work together using their natural abilities. Dae-yoon performed quick calculations. If we could establish 4 or 5 successful survival camps, each teaching techniques to newly rescued groups, the expansion rate could theoretically save all stranded personnel within the rescue timeline. Then we have a plan, Hyunwoo said firmly. Tomorrow we begin the largest hunting and teaching operation this planet has ever seen. That night, as his classmates slept peacefully for the first time since the crash, Hyunwoo stared up at the alien stars and thought about his grandfather's words. The old man had always said that human survival skills were not just about keeping one person alive. They were about keeping communities alive, about sharing knowledge and working together when times were hard. Tomorrow, they would find out if primitive human hunting techniques could save 60 aliens from 14 different worlds. It seemed impossible. But then again, a week ago his classmates would have said that making fire without technology was impossible too, and they had been wrong about that. The 5th day began before dawn, with preparations for the most ambitious survival operation any of them had ever imagined. Hyunwoo stood at the center of their camp, surrounded by weapons and tools that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. His alien classmates, now transformed into capable survival instructors, prepared for their individual missions. Remember, Hyunwoo said as he checked their equipment one final time, each crash site will have different challenges. Some groups may be hostile to primitive techniques. Others may be too weak to learn quickly. Stay patient and focus on immediate survival needs first. Taebin's crystalline body gleamed with renewed health and confidence. His pack contained carefully prepared mineral supplements that could sustain other crystalline species, plus detailed instructions for identifying suitable plants on alien worlds. I will take the northern crash sites. Tabin said. Long-range sensors indicate at least 2 Velthari groups and 1 Christek delegation in that area. I can teach them photosynthetic enhancement techniques using local vegetation. So Young's blue scales rippled with determination. Her equipment included portable humidity generators made from salvaged ship parts, plus knowledge of how to construct artificial pools and moisture collection systems. The eastern sites are near a river system, So Young reported. 3 aquatic species groups have been detected there. I can establish water-based survival camps and teach marine hunting techniques. Minho's energy form crackled with focused purpose. His modified uniform now contained processing units capable of converting a wide variety of organic materials into energy, compounds that could sustain multiple energy-based species. I will target the southern sites where several energy pattern species have been detected, Minho announced. The conversion techniques we developed should work for most electromagnetic physiologies. Wu Jin's leaves rustled with excitement. His pack contained seeds and cuttings from local plants that had proven safe for various plant-based species, plus detailed soil analysis tools made from ship components. The western crash sites are in mineral-rich soil areas, Wu Jin reported. Several plant species groups are located there. I can teach them soil preparation and root cultivation techniques. Da Yun, as always, coordinated the overall operation with mathematical precision. Her pack contained communication equipment, detailed maps of all crash sites, and carefully calculated nutritional requirements for every known species in their training fleet. I will establish a central coordination camp at the largest crash site, Da-un announced. From there, I can direct resources to areas of greatest need and maintain communication with all teams. As his friends prepared to leave for their individual missions, Hyunwoo felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. They had learned so much in just a few days, but now they would be teaching desperate aliens techniques that could mean the difference between life and death. What about you? Tabin asked. Where will you focus your efforts? Hyunwoo shouldered his own pack, which contained the most advanced hunting weapons he had been able to construct. His plan was more ambitious than any of theirs. I am going to establish supply lines between all the camps, he replied. Large-scale hunting operations that can provide meat and processed foods to every survivor group. While you teach them to sustain themselves, I will make sure no one starves while they are learning. The scale of what Hyunwoo was proposing was staggering. He planned to hunt enough large game to feed dozens of aliens from multiple species, then establish preservation and distribution systems that could keep everyone supplied until rescue arrived. Over the next several days, the forest became the site of the largest interspecies survival operation in galactic history. Each of Hyunwoo's classmates established successful teaching camps at crashed sites, where they passed on the primitive techniques that had saved their lives. Tabin's crystalline students learned to enhance their photosynthetic processes using carefully prepared plant broths. What had once seemed like impossible alchemy became standard survival procedure as crystal-based species discovered they could absorb nutrients from organic sources. So Young's aquatic camps developed sophisticated water management systems using nothing but salvaged ship parts and natural materials. Her students learned to construct humidity chambers, artificial pools, and even primitive aquaculture systems for raising local fish-like creatures. Minho's energy-based groups mastered the art of organic energy conversion, turning forest plants and animal proteins into the electromagnetic patterns their species required for survival. His teaching methods spread through energy species networks faster than anyone had expected. Wu Jin's plant species camps became gardens of alien vegetation, where students learned to modify soil, chemistry, and cultivate hybrid crops that could sustain multiple plant-based physiologies. Simultaneously, Daeyun's coordination center became the heart of a survival network that spanned the entire continent. Her mathematical mind proved perfectly suited to managing resource distribution and calculating nutritional needs for the growing population of survivors. But it was Hyunwoo's hunting operations that truly amazed everyone. Using techniques his grandfather had taught him for feeding large communities during hard times, he established trap lines and hunting grounds that could provide meat for hundreds of individuals. He coordinated group hunts involving survivors from multiple camps, teaching them to work together using their unique physiologies as advantages rather than limitations. Crystalline species became living prisms that could blind and confuse prey animals. Aquatic species used their swimming abilities to drive game toward waiting hunters. Energy-based species learned to use their electromagnetic properties to track animal movements across vast distances. Plant species developed root networks that could detect the approach of large herds days in advance. Even insectoid species like Dayun discovered that their mathematical minds were perfectly suited for calculating optimal trap placement and hunting strategies. The forest ecosystem, which had seemed hostile and alien just days earlier, became a vast survival classroom where dozens of advanced species learned the primitive skills their civilizations had forgotten: hunting, foraging, fire-making, food preservation, shelter construction, all the techniques that humans had never abandoned. When the rescue ships finally arrived 2 weeks after the initial crash, they found something unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of desperate survivors barely clinging to life, they discovered thriving interspecies communities that had not only survived, but created sustainable settlements in the alien forest. The rescue commander, a gruff military officer from the Altarian Defense Force, stood in amazement as he surveyed the largest survivor camp. Dozens of beings from multiple worlds worked together to process freshly hunted meat, tend cooking fires, and maintain sophisticated shelters built entirely from natural materials. In 30 years of rescue operations, I have never seen anything like this, the commander told Daeun as she presented her detailed survival reports. How did you manage to not only keep everyone alive but actually create functioning communities? Daeun's compound eyes focused on Hyunwoo, who was teaching a group of young cadets how to construct hunting spears from salvaged materials. We learned that what we had always considered primitive was actually the most advanced survival technology in the galaxy, she replied, and only humans had retained that knowledge. The rescue commander followed her gaze to where Hyunwoo patiently demonstrated spear-throwing techniques to aliens whose species had not hunted wild game for thousands of years. One human did all this? One human taught all of us to do this, Daeun corrected. He showed us that cooperation and ancient wisdom were more valuable than any technology we possessed. As the rescue operation continued over several days, stories spread throughout the galactic military about the human cadet who had saved over 60 aliens using nothing but primitive survival skills. But those who had lived through the experience knew the real lesson was deeper than that. They had learned that intelligence was not just about advanced technology and sophisticated civilizations. True intelligence was about adaptability, cooperation, and the wisdom to retain knowledge that others had discarded as obsolete. When Hyunwoo finally boarded the rescue ship for the journey home, his alien classmates gathered to see him off. But they were no longer the same beings who had crashed in the forest 2 weeks earlier. They had been transformed by their experience into something new. Advanced beings who understood the value of primitive skills. Will you continue teaching these techniques when we return to the academy? Taibin asked. Hyunwoo smiled as he looked at his friends, who had become the first interspecies primitive survival instructors in galactic history. I think, he replied, that you will be doing the teaching from now on. You understand something that most of the galaxy has forgotten, that the oldest knowledge is sometimes the most valuable knowledge of all. As their ship lifted off from the forest world, Hyunwoo looked down at the thriving survivor camps they were leaving behind. Those communities would continue to exist until the last stragglers were rescued, sustained by techniques that humans had never forgotten, and that aliens had learned just in time to save their lives.